Hello, everybody.
Hey you, welcome. I know I'm a bit late to the game, but I've been hoping to upload this for more than a few months already. I guess I'd allowed for things to get away from me for a bit. I know that I'd somehow entirely missed this trend, and countless others have already beaten me to the punch, but nonetheless, I thought I'd upload this video anyways. Getting to the point, it's as simple as this. AI will ruin everything, even if we do control it perfectly. It'll make every last human position irrelevant, especially within any economy that's driven by this automation. Now, I'm not saying this out of some sort of Luddite persuasion. Even more importantly, I'm not exaggerating when I say this, no matter how much of one it might seem like I'm making. You see, the purpose of this video isn't to scare you or to make you use AI any less than you probably already do. Rather, I say this in order to instead build an understanding of just what exact sort of situation that AI very well might lead up to.
So I think we should be cautious with AI.
To prove my point, consider the following. I'm sure you might be familiar with many of the more recent stuff produced by AI these days, such as the defunct This Person Does Not Exist, DALL-E, and of course, Chat.OpenAI, as well as GTP-4. These might have seemed flawed or otherwise limited in their implementations of artificial intelligence, but you shouldn't write it off as a gimmick. Even though they weren't so useful or effective only maybe just a few years ago, they're constantly and quickly improving upon themselves with every new update. Feeding off of endless streams of data from the web, these tools are best described as statistical machines. In other words, you can train these AIs to act in any manner that you please, and it'll reproduce that training data that you'd fed into it. Putting it simply, garbage in, garbage out. Give it a few hundred properly titled pictures of umbrellas, and it'll spit out the most relevant rendition of an umbrella that it can, based off of what you'd fed it. Naturally, this process can be made as more or less specific as needed, so long as there's data to base these terms off of. Now that you fundamentally know what an AI is, we can start to delve a little deeper into the initial, more obvious problems that it can, does, and will pose. You not using their AIs will do nothing to stop them from using your speech, productivity, and behaviors to train it, especially considering the fact that people are generally unwilling to give up any number of their random pieces of tech in their own home, particularly any that might require an internet connection to function. It's not exactly breaking news anymore to hear that smartphones, smart TVs, and any number of other such things are always listening in, be it for the sake of selling data to advertisers or maybe even some AI. With that in mind though, it would be ideal if you did take a moment to step away from it and get a new perspective regarding things. Short of some sort of strange twist of fate of the collective, active decision not to proceed further with the development of AI, life as we know it now will slowly change in a way that likely nobody will be able to recognize. It is akin to Pandora's box that we'd already long since opened, and we're only just now starting to see the shadows of the things lurking within. It's first worth noting that the biggest problems that account for the upcoming future of AI can be described succinctly. All of the paths of this scenario ultimately conclude in one outcome. There will be a collapse of not only the value of the average person, but also their demands, their efforts, their needs, and their fundamental value in regards to their sheer existence. If virtually anything that any person ever can and will do can be automated, then there will be far less value behind these actions than there ever has been before. Elaborating, why would a factory raise their wages if it's simply more efficient to replace you with automation? Why would anyone buy your private works if they can simply scan it in digitally and recreate it when you're not looking? Why would anyone pay to work on their property if they can simply just rent a robot for practically dirt cheap, turning the cost of materials into pretty much only major cost of labor? So, AI is clearly a threat to humans as well as our ability to meaningfully actualize ourselves. People are ultimately going to be drowned out by an endless tide of production from AI. Already, we can see some examples of this in society through the work of Jason M. Allen and the art he submitted into the Colorado State Fair annual art competition. Having created this art through the Midjourney AI, he was able to win first prize in the contest. He argues that, in spite of the outrage from the other contestants, he didn't break any rules, going even further to brazenly state, art is dead. As you can see from the art provided, his point clearly has some substance. Doubtlessly before long, we'll be seeing a lot more art like this in contests and on social media, increasingly and almost definitively reaching a point of being indiscernible from art made by hand. I imagine that this practice will either proceed to be accepted or end up being banned. After all, we don't allow for performance-enhancing drugs to be used in sports or marathon races or whatever. Considering the fact that the entire purpose of such competitions ultimately comes down to seeing just what exactly the human element can accomplish, rather than how well we can compete a marathon race with something like a car.
Wow, that's a pretty depressing thought.
Another important part of the conversation here is the importance of recognizing how machinery will forever guide the creative process. Exploring the fictional setting of the works of John Wagner and Cam Kennedy through their 1986 Kenny Who short story, we're able to find an interesting exploration of this particular question. Simply put, Kennedy's an artist that aspires to reach the highest points possible through his work. In the pursuit of his goal, he sets out to meet someone at a major publisher, seeking an interview. The twist here is that despite getting the initial interest from the manager, he's instead sent away, only to later on find out that the work that he'd shown the manager had been scanned into a machine when he wasn't looking. Unbelievably, this machine proves capable of recreating his style in a matter of an instant. Naturally, the comic ends just as you'd expect it would. However, the point here isn't the comic. Rather, it's the idea explored behind it. From my perspective, this work is oddly prescient in regards to how it portrays the future of a world under AI. Even though in this case, in particular, it's acting as little more than a set piece for a story. Despite this, it's just as it is for many artists in real life. The constant and prevalent scanning of AI upon an unwitting population at large very well might open up a path for a much larger array of people to lose their careers, in a manner similar to what we see happening with artists today already in real life. Nonetheless, having his work being reduced to little more than one among many mass productions of a robot, Kenny's unique ability and skills have effectively been turned into little more than just another generic and unimpressive work within the world, with little practical value at all, not only to the publisher, but also to himself and anyone else who might care for his work. In other words, if you're an accountant or a manager, or possibly even a programmer with little to offer the world in regards to your expertise outside of simply knowing whatever skill you may have, you may find your entry or even your continued existence within the field to be increasingly difficult and with a lesser recognized value. At least, for now, we have the benefit of our managers recognizing the necessity that someone must be around to make sure that any generated artifacts must be able to be handled by those with the skills to recognize and fix them. Though I feel that before long, this too could be reduced away to the role of a single person, the role of a single manager or engineer. All they'd have to do is type questions or demands into a prompt, while their automated network of robots and repair systems would proceed onward to fulfill their needs at a degree of efficiency that would leave no room for human inefficiency. It might even be likely that most, if not all, machines in this scenario could exist without ever so much as even seeing a single human being, from creation to retirement. If this future of cheap robotics proves to become prominent enough, it might be likely that the same things will happen to any other employment that involves work that can be replicated through some sort of robot or machine. All humans will be rendered irrelevant in their own economy. I'm sure that you might have already seen plenty of jobs being replaced by automation in the past, and I'm sure that this trend will only continue to get even more worrying, given how humans generally don't stack up that well against the efficiency of the robotics of today. Ultimately, it's for this reason that, in the future, I don't think it'll be a stretch to say that people like you or I will be almost certainly unable to compete. It is simply a fact that humans aren't able to run endlessly, like some sort of robot that needs only basic maintenance and its electric bill paid in order to function effectively. In an economy that adopts AI in combination with robotics, it's likely that even those with skills will be worth less than whatever you'd get from something like minimum wage. As such, humanity will be either reduced to picking through the trash or to some state of dependency to some machine. This dependency will come with a catch that although you might have some choice in food or entertainment or whatever, it's very likely that it will be limited by way of just exactly how luxurious your options and selection for food and clothes or whatever else might be. This alone, of course, might seem unimportant, but the key is this. What if every other human in the system wanted to live in abundance and luxury as well? Naturally, the system would be forced to compensate. Now, what if everyone wanted those things, but also had 10 children every generation? You see, the status of being a pet, of course, has its unfortunate requirement of being neutered for this exact reason, the same reason as we neuter our own pets today. So long as you're dependent, you'll have no choice in complying. It'll be like this explicitly because you'll never be efficient or smart enough to be able to compete with the robotics or rise above the realm of irrelevance and be able to garner the value necessary to decide for yourself. The way I see it, if we're to put this speculative society through the terms of biology, it'll effectively be like as though our body or our economy has been overtaken with a cancer. This cancer, it'll just serve to absorb all of our employment, our land, and all of our freely accessible resources which none of us will be able to afford now because nobody can contribute anything of worth to this new hyper-efficient AI-driven society. There is nothing that we'd be able to produce that this AI system would value enough to buy instead of making it itself. So it's as Alan said, yeah, art's dead, dude. Do you understand yet why this is a problem? It's possible that you might think I'm being hyperbolic. Right, you might say. So what? It doesn't seem all that capable in regards to mathematics or programming, as of yet. Sure, the most visible uses of AI so far are of people using it to make AI art or do voiceovers of pre-existing actors or characters, but it's just not that complex. It's just a gimmick, a tool. Well, here's the thing. These tools are exactly just as you might say. They're only the most visible uses of AI that you know of so far. The reality is AI has been filling up the positions of entire HR departments, PR departments, and advertising agencies, as well as basic management and administration roles for years now. Another example, only just a few years back, China had released the world's first AI news anchor. Now, Kuwait is coming out with their own, same as India. Before long, I wager it's only a matter of time before places like YouTube and Twitter and Facebook become filled with nothing but bots, producing the same cheap, lowest common denominator AI content that will likely be better than the average, yet at the same time still cheaper than the average in regards to costs and time and budget. Even now, we could already see something like this coming to be. As we speak, it's a growing trend on Twitch to stream 24/7 AI content. One Twitch streamer operating under the handle of Unlimited Steam has been streaming an AI-generated comedy show based loosely off of the steamed hams meme for some time now, creating endless variations of the joke to somewhat good effect using GTP3. The channel runs for hours at a time, playing different renditions of the same joke over and over again. In spite of this, it did a good job at holding my attention. It even made me laugh a little bit at some points too. In a similar case, there's another channel called Watch Me Forever. Just like steamed hams, they're also built around AI jokes. But in this case specifically, it appears to be inspired directly by the 90s comedy sitcom show Seinfeld. They too operate off of a similar context, also creating endless iterations of what appear to be an array of jokes that are either inspired by the show or by content seen elsewhere on the web. Clearly, as this type of technology continues to develop and proliferate, I can easily imagine that the upcoming years will be filled with nothing but generic content produced en masse. Just an endless tide of garbage produced by AI. If I'm to put on my cynic hat a little bit and be more skeptical about this, I'd say that this endless tide of AI content could be used to justify introducing means of censorship and control over things like the web. People might feel that the argument for digital ID might make sense in regards to discerning the difference between the production of an AI or a person, when the reality is that the only thing it'll accomplish is it'll make it easier to track your statements and actions online, among any number of other things, especially if they tie to things like travel and purchases. All to protect our democracy, no less. After all, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, right? Things like privacy clearly have no use in a modern world like this. There's an extensive degree of vulnerability that comes with everyone knowing everything about you, even if you think you have nothing to hide. Getting back to the main point, your information being widely available to governments means that it's also available to AIs and companies as well. Your behavior will be quantified, and they, as well as every other institution and individual around, will know everything there is to know about you, as well as your perspectives and tendencies and personality. All it takes is a single group to take advantage of that, or a single individual desperate for power, seeking to craft the perfect narrative to manipulate you and everyone else into compliance with their marketing scheme or policy change. Thankfully, this hasn't happened yet, right? Well, nonetheless, all this information is going to be used to train AI into doing any number of different things, and once all these different things are automated, guess what's going to happen? There will be less reason than there ever has been before to do anything. There will be few, or if any, instances in which people can or will be able to occupy any meaningful position with the society. A degree of nihilism will take root, regardless of how much you might wish not to take in that perspective. I don't think it'd be a stretch to say that the value of the lives of others will be reduced a little more than meaningless noise in your daily life. Rather, it'd probably just serve as a distraction to your endlessly curated AI content, streaming from the web, designed perfectly for your consumption. The world will look a little bit more like Albert Camus's book, The Stranger. nobody will give a damn about what happens to anyone else in their life because nobody does anything meaningful. Nobody does anything important, even if they wanted to. Even your complaints will be indiscernible from the voices of AIs drowning you out, each one sounding just as real as the other, just as real as your own. Your successes will equally be irrelevant too, if only for the fact that nobody will even know that your successes have ever existed. If you write a book, nobody will read it. If you draw a picture, nobody will even know that it'll exist. If you made a game, how are you even going to sell it online? Who'd even buy it if they can just ask an AI to make something similar for them anyway? People will be reduced to little more than passive observers in their own lives. Nothing will matter to them or to other people because they can't provide any meaning to themselves or to others. The inevitability and purposelessness of life becomes everything. Because after all, that's all that's left. In a society where the economy is no longer primarily driven by or for humans, machines will rule. These machines will always be more effective and more efficient and more intelligent than humans. Maybe not on an individual level, of course, but ultimately humans will be pushed to the wayside. And by that point, there will be little or nothing that we can do about it anymore. Once this comes to pass, I believe that society will most likely manifest in 3 particular ways. First possible outcome, of course, would be that people ultimately decide to stop this scenario before it gets too far. This, of course, is unlikely to say the least. I say this because it would take some serious willpower and cooperation for all the world to overlook the endless benefits that AI could provide in order to overcome the endless costs. In other words, simply, people decide not to embrace AI and all production ceases. Society will continue to persist upon being human-driven, just as it has been since the beginning of time. I'm sure automation and some forms of narrow AI might exist in some form or another for the sake of specialized functionality. Maybe the laws of quantum superposition just prove to be too much of an obstacle for silicon computers to overcome, and that ultimately, the only way to efficiently and effectively achieve artificial intelligence is for it to be developed through something akin to what we already see in biology. The second, though more likely outcome, is of course the embracing of the redistribution of resources between the robotics that provide and the population that depends upon them. In other words, communism, or socialism, whatever you want to call it. As the population becomes more dependent due to their increasing uselessness, it's possible that they'll allow for this system of control to take root as this automated economy encloses in around them. People have described this ideal as being titled fully automated space communism. In other words, all of our needs, resources, and labor will be ideally provided for us through automation. Elaborating, there's no need for backbreaking work because some machine will do it for us. There's no need to maintain these robots because more robots will repair them, as well as each other. There's also no need to manage these robots or whatever else that might exist because, after all, there's already warehouses of computer systems that will know exactly what to do, down to the very last millionth of a percentile of margin of error. See, you might like this outcome, but I don't. Reason being, of course, for the most part, humans will be either forced to commit to jobs that the robotics and AI somehow prove unable to do, if any such jobs prove to exist at all. And outside of this, people will be reduced to an almost infantile state, if not akin to something quite like a pet. Again, this might sound like hyperbole to hear me say this, but I feel that the term is pretty accurate in describing just what exact sort of circumstances that people will find themselves in. In other words, collectively again, there will be no real degree of agency. There's no agency because if you don't like what you're being fed, what are you going to say? You can't say no. I mean, if you choose not to eat what you're offered, you're just not going to eat. I mean, you might think that you'd be able to ask for whatever you wanted in this idealistic world, but the reality is this. The food and clothes don't stop being made out of resources that fundamentally have value in regards to demand and how much of it exists already. If too much of a demand exists and they can't sustain the supply, you'll either have to wait in a bread line, or they're simply not going to offer you the option. Again, add in the problem of exponentially growing population, and the consequential exponentially growing demand, and suddenly it doesn't matter if the economy encompasses the entire solar system. There is simply not going to be a way to feed everyone. So what would this mean to you as a parasitic dependent pet to this system? Well, nothing of course, because you're probably going to be sterile. All because not enough people could get their Funko Pops, or something stupid. There's lastly, of course, the third option. In a desire to maintain their freedom as well as to provide for themselves rather than to be dependent, it's likely that people might actually choose to continue to compete with AI, even if, of course, they might actually not be able to stack up that well against something like a genuine AI, or maybe even just a robotic arm that's able to move for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They'll still be poor and suffering, but at least they'll be the ones to choose how many kids they can have. They'll get to choose what kind of food they get to eat or what kind of clothes they get to wear, if only for the fact that they're the only ones who have to care about the cost. So long as humans continue to have a place in workspaces like an Amazon warehouse, regardless of the micromanagement from AI or whatever else that might operate this place, it's feasible at least, that people will be able to make a living for themselves. Probably not as luxurious as being a dependent parasite, but nonetheless, they'll be the ones to choose their own destiny. However, as automation proceeds, I feel that this environment will be increasingly unsustainable. How will people be able to afford goods if humans are no longer the most efficient component in their own society? How will something like Twitter Blue remain the premier means by which people can access social media of and for only humans, if no one human can find proper employment that would allow for them to afford it in the first place? Besides, in such a scenario where the economy is primarily driven by AI, wouldn't this just be another opportunity to manipulate the population? Seeing as it's now the premium way to expose itself to the human populations who might be unwittingly unaware of the value of such an effort. Arguably, I believe that there could be some sort of mixture of elements from all three of these possible conclusions that could come into play upon society. Already, people are using ChatGPT to make them an income in this regard, simply by way of offering it a budget and asking for it to make an income off of the inefficiency of the market. Alternatively, some groups will choose not to take part in modern society, possibly through something resembling the Amish, if they're not joining the Amish outright. Some groups might simply just accept modern society for what it is and make the most of their faculties in order to eke out a meaningful existence in this modern world. Some might simply just give in to their inability to compete and just demand to be made dependent upon this AI system. Or they could be genetically modified to change themselves in a way that would allow for them to at least compete with AI. This option here is probably the most worrying. By way of trying to compete with AI through a manner of genetic modification, we're putting ourselves into a nightmare catch-22 scenario. If we choose not to modify or integrate ourselves, we might predominantly lose in all cases against AI, regardless of our needs or scenario. If we do choose to modify or integrate ourselves, then this will only proceed to step into an entirely different, yet equally existential threat that has been described and coined as a phenotypic revolution by Jean-Francois Gariépy, also known as the author of the book, The Revolutionary Phenotype. Particularly, the problem of depending upon gene modification is described succinctly and thoroughly, as well as also colloquially, as the replicator tango. By externalizing the source of our genetic code from our parents and offloading this responsibility onto a machine, like an AI or even a basic computer algorithm, we will in effect become dependent upon the success of this AI, computer, or algorithm in order to see our own reproductive success. To put it another way, the average human, if not all humans, would become little more than the human equivalent of ants or bees in a colony. Due to the reproductive success effectively being handed off directly to a machine, we would become dependent upon it for the hyper-adaptive qualities that it offers us as humans. We'd have no choice but to continue on that particular path, lest we fall behind and be unable to compete in this new world. As time passes on, it's likely that eventually by way of evolution, in that the most successful system will almost certainly correlate with the most reproductively effective one, it is feasible to see that our reproductive process would be almost completely replaced by this machine. By this point, of course, it would be very likely that we would have become little more than sterile and dependent, again, very much akin to ants or bees of a colony, existing only for the sake of it. Nonetheless, one way or another, it's practically a guarantee that we're going to be using things like brain-computer interfaces as a means of competing with AI. Through this, I imagine we'll be able to hold ourselves over for the time being. Elon Musk's Neuralink will likely allow for us to output data as quickly as we can think it. We'll be able to interface with machinery and technology, just like how an AI might. So in this regard, we'll at least have some chance to not end up totally irrelevant. Out of all this, I imagine that this stays true to the Pandora's box analogy. Out of every cost that AI might come with, there still remains the hope that there will be a situation where we'll be able to have the possibility for us to decide our own futures, rather than depend on some machine to do so for us. Through this, I feel that there's at least a chance that we'll be able to continue providing for ourselves, and be able to continue to act in a manner that's meaningful within this world, not only to ourselves, but to others as well. I suppose that's pretty much it when it comes down to my primary concerns. A lot of the stuff has been glossed over, and going any further into detail would likely only just result in this video getting even longer than it already is. Besides that, of everything that I can see so far, it feels like there's no chance that human society will ever stop developing this tool of AI. It's worth noting that these scenarios that I provided are just the ones that I feel to be the most likely ones to occur, under, of course, the scenario that this just happens to end up being a world where the AI with the most resources isn't badly trained and doesn't just end up trying to turn the planet into paperclips because of either some sort of corrupted memory causing it to change its objectives, or possibly because of bad programming, or even because of something as simple as a discrepancy between the training or simulation data and the real world. All of these possibilities have deep, deep rabbit holes, and I heavily expect that it will be through these means that things could go very, very wrong. Ultimately, the moment we adopted automation into our policies and society was the moment that we started this steady march of development that would inevitably outpace the development of our own ability to adapt as a species to these very same changes. In such a case, although it might sound excessively dramatic, I figure that the best path forward would be if the world were forced to somehow undergo some sort of collapse that ended this development, or in the very least, forestalled in a way that would give us more time. That way, there would at least be an opportunity for us to better adapt to this problem, somehow. Be it by way of the development of new technology maybe, or new virtues, or morals, or ethics regarding how our world should proceed, and so on. It'll be more time to not only develop this thing in isolation from the rest of the world, or away from a vulnerable global network, but also more time to adopt a civil leadership that understood and respected what was valuable for its own populations. Lastly, allow for this to be done in a way that would give us the option for a future outside of the one where our lives are merely reduced to being little more than pets, or possibly even biological hardware for some global, uncaring, planet-scaling machine. Looking as if it had been ripped straight out of some sort of sci-fi story. This is why people like Elon Musk, Stephen Hawking, Stuart Russell, and so on have been so vehemently outspoken about the propagation of AI tech. As you can see, people have been increasingly recognizing the potential of this problem for some time now, probably more so now than ever before. Although, I can't say that I'm nearly the first to have thought these things. I feel that I can at least be happy knowing that I've said something. We are quickly approaching the time limit for having our own interests be recognized and for society to continue to persist for the sake of our own existence. Until then, the best solution? Recognize AI for the cancer to our society that it is, and find a way to properly learn to establish, cement, and prioritize the influence of humanity over that of the error-prone and uncaring AI systems within society as it is now, while we still can. If you're still watching, I just wanted to say thank you for sticking all the way through to the end. The episode is a lot longer than I thought it was going to be, and also a lot harder too, especially to edit. There are a lot of retakes and re-edits, and 5 months later, I mean, look at it, it's pretty shit. So yeah, just let me know what you think. Please like and share and subscribe and whatever. Take care for whenever I upload again.